Ladies and gentlemen, we are delighted to welcome you to this annual Howard R. Driggs lecture. And as soon as our lecturer shows up, we'll get started. Dr. Bushman, we'll be calling on you for an extemporaneous speech. We are delighted to have so many students here. By show of hands, how many current SU students do we have here? There we go. We're delighted to have you all here. Thank you for being here. This lecture honors Dr. Howard R. Driggs, one of the founders of Southern Utah University. The Driggs collection is housed in the Sherritt Library Special Collections, and I believe there is a special brochure in your program tonight. I want to acknowledge just a few people as we get started. First, the chair of the committee, Janet Signal. Where's Janet? Janet, please stand up and be recognized for all your hard work. Also, really, one of the driving forces behind this has been Camille Bradford, and Camille's come over very diligently from Denver, relative of a descendant of Howard R. Driggs and a real friend of the university, and she's been instrumental in helping put this lecture together, but also in helping us with the collection that Dr. Driggs so graciously gave the university. So Camille, please stand and be recognized. And also Alan Christensen, the director of the Benson Institute at BYU, and also a Driggs descendant, and we're delighted to have you, Alan, and your wife here tonight. Thank you very much. We'd also like to thank the Friends of the Sherritt Library. That's a group that John and I and his associates have put together, folks that have a real interest in what we do at the library. I've said many times that I believe the library is should be the focus of any great campus. And I would argue that our Sherritt Library is as fine a facility for a campus our size as you'll find anywhere. And John and his colleagues all do a terrific job. Also, the SU Creative Engagement Center has been instrumental in helping us this evening. This lecture continues to mark many significant firsts. The inaugural lecture was given by a former governor and cabinet secretary, Michael O'Levitt. That was then followed by a Pulitzer Prize winner, Daniel Walker Howe, who won the 2007 Pulitzer for History for his wonderful work, What Hath God Wrought? The Transformation of America, 1815 to 1848. And if anybody could make the 19th century come alive like Dr. Howe, I remember that was a wonderful evening. Last year, we were delighted to welcome to campus Dayton Duncan, the award-winning author and documentary filmmaker, who talked about his latest collaboration with Ken Burns, the National Parks, America's Greatest Idea. This year is no different. It marks another great first. Tonight we have the pleasure of kind of a twofer. Richard Bushman, a noted historian, gets to introduce his wife, Claudia Bushman, another noted historian. And I had a chance to visit with the Bushmans today. And to you young SU students, I know when I was writing my book on President Truman, David McCullough, whom I had a chance to interview, said that the tendency at times for historians and political scientists is, as he put it, to suck the warm blood out of historical figures. And that's not what history is about. History is about people, it's about philosophies and feelings and personalities. And these two people, Claudia and Richard, have helped bring to life a history for our generation and for generations to come. And we are absolutely delighted to welcome them both to campus. I know Claudia had a chance to speak to 3 different classes today, so we really got a lot out of Claudia today. And we're very, very appreciative. So I now turn the podium over to Dr. Richard Bushman, who will introduce his wife, Claudia.
Claudia and I have had a lovely time on a beautiful day on this lovely campus. Met some very interesting people. I must say you have not only a great administrator in your president, but a great salesman. We sat in his office for half an hour. We walked out and said, you know, we have a granddaughter who wants to come to this school. So Nadia is going to get some final materials on SUU. So it's you never know what will come from a visit like this. It's very good of you all to come here tonight. Claudia's has introduced me on a number of occasions tonight, so in the past. So tonight I'm going to get my revenge. I met Claudia in 1952. I was a New England Mormon missionary. She was a freshman at Wellesley College, just outside of Boston. And after I met her, it took me, I'd say, about 45 minutes to decide this is the girl I was going to marry. After I returned to Harvard that fall, it took a couple of years to clean up the details, but it was a foregone conclusion in my mind that she was the only one. We were married in 1955, just after I graduated from college. She graduated the following spring, wearing her commencement gown as a maternity dress. I didn't know who Claudia was when I married her. As a matter of fact, she didn't know who she was either. She thought of herself as a sophisticated young woman of the world who had lots of boyfriends and liked good times. She did not think of herself as a student of any kind. The important thing was experiences and adventures. And why she married me, anything but a romantic adventure, is a mystery to both of us. But she wanted to go out dancing. I suggested a study date in the Wellesley Library. During our first year of marriage in graduate school and my years of teaching at Brigham Young University, she came to realize the consequences of marrying a drudge. On the surface, she had everything she had wanted, that she'd been brought up to work for: a husband, children, a small but reliable income, friends, position in the Latter-day Saint Church. That was what life was about, so far as she'd been taught. But she knew in her gut that something was missing, and she didn't know what. There was no feminist movement then to articulate women's discontents. She had no one to talk to, no sympathetic Mormon sisters in the same pickle. I was utterly baffled by the whole situation. All she knew was that something was lacking. And that was the beginning of the Claudia Bushman we know today. Growing up, she never dreamed of getting a master's degree, much less a PhD. She did not want either one very much herself. All she knew was that that was the one door that was open to her. Because of my faculty positions, she had her tuition paid. Wasn't going to be an expense for the family on a tight budget. Going to class gave her a small but liberating space outside her house. As she says, she began her master's with 2 children and ended it with 3. She began her PhD with 5 children and finished with 6. Her achievements since that time have been born out of this intense need for significance. She has always said she needs to prove that she is alive, but also out of her immense passion and enthusiasm for anything she engages to. She's never had a full-time faculty position, but I wonder how many tenured faculty members in our country can list 12 books among their publications. And that is only part of the story. In Boston, she was the editor and the force behind a collection of essays called Mormon Sisters, about Mormon women through history. She was the editor of an issue of a Mormon journal called Dialogue. She was the founding editor of another women's paper called Exponent 2, picking up on the 19th century Mormon publication. In Delaware, where we moved next, she founded a historical society for our town, Newark, where the university was located, and was appointed appointed head of the Delaware Heritage Commission to celebrate the bicentennial of ratification of the United States Constitution. In New York, she headed the American Studies program in Columbia's Liberal Studies program, directed the 250th Anniversary Committee for the university, organized a 2,400-person Jubilee extravaganza in Radio City Music Hall, sponsored a concert of LDS singers in Carnegie Hall, and was chosen New York Mother of the Year. I don't know how those things fit together, but it did in her case. In California, where we taught for 3 years, she taught Mormon women's history in the Claremont School of Religion, founded the Mormon Women's Oral History Project that now has collected and transcribed over 140 two-hour interviews from Mormon women all over the United States and in Europe and Australia. And it's recently been proposed by the School of Religion, even though we are gone, that this be expanded to include Muslim and Jewish women. So wherever she has gone, she's left a mark. The great literary historian Ethel Matheson, in the preface to his book, The American Renaissance, spoke of two men who said had taught him most about the possibilities of life in America. Well, Claudia has taught me about the possibilities of life for women in our time. She's a remarkable person who has no idea how remarkable she is. I'm pleased to present to you Claudia Bushman.
Well, I too am very happy to be here today. I'm very pleased to be the fourth speaker in this series to honor Howard R. Driggs. I'm very happy to be here on your Founders Day to learn several times and in various ways the wonderful story that started this institution. Very happy to have met so many people that I already think so highly of and hope to see again someplace in the future. I've known of a number of remarkable people in the Briggs clan, which is a prolific, imaginative, talented group, and I've been happy to meet family members again here today. Howard Driggs taught at this institution when it first opened in 1897, as I'm sure everyone here knows, and then for 16 years at the University of Utah. And then he received his PhD from NYU in New York University in 1926 and stayed on there to teach for another 15 years. That's a place very near to where I live in the city of New York. During those busy years, he taught teachers how to teach, churning out a huge, remarkable series of more than 50 educational books. He also wrote at least 7 novels. His most notable achievements, from my view, however, were related to his ability to value the past and to realize that it was rapidly receding. His own life growing up in the West compared starkly to his life in New York with an urban culture that had already lasted for 400 years. He saw that the developing years of the American West had powerful lessons of individuality, self-reliance, adventure, courage, and bravery that should be documented. His dual East-West life must have been a constant reminder that those early days in wide spaces could be lost forever. And so he added content to his teaching materials and talked about the early days of exploration, the cattle drives, the ranches, the Oregon Trail, the Pony Express, encounters with Native Americans. He recorded stories for his grandsons, for people coming later. It is that urge of his that I prize very highly. We all have lives, experiences, and visions, and conversations of a lifetime stored in our brains. But unlike Driggs, we do not all have the vision that our experiences are of value and will disappear if we do not record them, reflect on them, interpret them, and store them away for those in the future. Driggs had that vision, along with the habit of writing, always writing, and the skill that that regular habit brought him. He had the repeated experience of publication, which moved memories into books available to the public. There is nothing easy or automatic about that process. Imagination, skill, dogged discipline are required to write any substantial record or published book. Driggs' stepdaughter, Camille Bradford, who is here this evening, described his desire to write the true stories of the pioneers for children and adults. He stressed the importance of preserving first-hand accounts of historical events. He felt passionately about thorough research and getting the story down. At an advanced age, he still got up very early and worked long hours. Driggs had lived on the retreating cusp of the American frontier, a conception which is rich in meaning and in actuality. He was a little too late to write the memoirs that he might like to have written. He was 37 years old in 1910 when Elijah Nicholas Wilson, then 68, 37, 68, another generation, sat down at his broken typewriter and thumped out his story, which was later known as The White Indian Boy. Wilson, who had never been to school, who had learned his ABCs from his wife, had an immensely rich, daring, and dangerous life. Wilson was the real McCoy, an American pioneer, a childhood runaway, the adopted brother of Shoshone Chief Washakie, the Pony Express rider, a stagecoach rider for Salt Lake City entrepreneur Ben Holiday, a blacksmith, a prison guard, a farmer, a Mormon bishop, prison inmate convicted of unlawful cohabitation, which, as we know, is the charge the government laid on Mormon polygamous husbands, a carpenter, cabinet maker, fiddler, trapper, trader, and a frontier doctor. When Wilson was 12, some Indian boys persuaded him to join their Indian tribe to replace the lost husband and son of the Shoshone chief's sister. She had dreamed that a son would return as a white papoose. Young Nick was afraid to go, but he was tempted by a pretty pony, the offer of bows and arrows, and as many buckskin clothes as he could wear. The Indians also promised food, all kinds of meat and berries and fish, sage chickens, ducks, geese, and rabbits to eat. That surely beat living on lumpy dick and greens, which was his usual pioneer fare. Nick was lonely and tired of herding sheep, so in August of 1854 he left home with them and was gone for 2 years. His new Indian mother was very good to him. When this Indian mother asked him whether he wanted to return home, he showed himself a pretty cool customer. He said he'd like to see his folks, but if he went home, they'd keep him there, and he didn't want to herd sheep. He said he'd really rather play with white boys than Indian boys, but that he liked his bows and arrows, and his father would never let him keep them because he would always be shooting at the cats and chickens. I like my pony too, and I couldn't take him home, I said. And I love you too, he said to his mother. If I went away, you could not go with me. So taking it all around, I should rather stay with you. And so stayed with the Indians for a while. Wilson wrote this story in 1910 and lived for 5 more years. Driggs was apparently called in to help edit Wilson's account, and 98 years later he picked it up and republished it. And it is this combination of skills of men like Wilson and Driggs that has left us our rich frontier legacy. My title tonight is from another literary work, which I hope many of you recognize from your nursery days. How many of you do recognize Lost, Stolen, or Strayed? Nobody? Nobody recognizes Lost, Stolen, or Strayed? All right, well, then you'll learn something. This is from A. Mills' collection of childhood poetry when we were very young. Alan Alexander Milne was the father of Christopher Robin and the stepfather of Winnie the Pooh. Characters who do not appear in this poem, Disobedience, about James Morrison, Weatherby George Dupree, who lost his mother when she tried to get down to the end of the town. She hadn't been heard from since. The poem, of course, is an inversion. It's a world turned upside down, of the endless fear that parents have that their children will stray away and be lost. In this poem, James, aged 3, tells his mother to stay put. He warns her, but she pays no heed to him and is, as a result, inexorably lost. The poem is a humorous caricature for us because as children, we didn't get lost. We ran off, we were naughty, but we were forgiven if we promised never to do it again. But for me, as an adult, this poem has sinister and heartbreaking meaning. I am the adult, the responsible one. What will happen if I do not accept the responsibility to hold on to my mother, to her valued contributions to the world, to her skills and talents, to the many attributes of character which made her unique, admired, sought after, envied, memorable, even idolized by her many fans? What will happen to all that valuable information if I have been lazy and distracted, if I haven't taken notes or kept a journal or written letters and sketches? As I said before, we have only a brief period between when we become aware of the possible loss of all that material and when we are unable to get it down. I'm going to read you this poem, Disobedience by A. Milne, to remind you to think of things in that way. And there is a repeated refrain at the end of some of the verses, which goes like this. You must never go down to the end of the town if you don't go down with me. Let's hear you say it. You must never go down to the end of the town if you don't go down with me. Once more. You must never go down to the end of the town if you don't go down with me. Okay, here's the poem. James Morrison, Weatherby George Dupree, took great care of his mother, though he was only 3. James said to his mother, Mother, he said he, you must never go down to the end of the town if you don't go down with me. James Morrison's mother put on her golden gown. James Morrison's mother drove to the end of the town. James Morrison's mother said to herself, said she, I can get right down to the end of the town and be back in time for tea. King John put up a notice, lost, stolen, or strayed. James Morrison's mother seems to have been mislaid. Last seen wandering vaguely, quite of her own accord. She tried to get down to the end of the town. 40 shillings reward. James Morrison, commonly known as Jim, told his other relations not to go blaming him. James said to his mother, Mother, he said he, you must never go down to the end of the town if you don't go down with me. James Morrison's mother hasn't been heard from since. King John said he was sorry, and so did the Queen and Prince. King John, somebody told me, said to a man he knew, well, if people go down to the end of the town, what can anyone do? Then there is this last verse, which you say very quietly. J.M.W.G. Dupree took great care of his M, though he was only. J. said to his M, he said he, you must never go down to the end of the town if you don't go down with me. Well, I'm very disappointed that you all don't know that poem. You should have learned it at your mother's knee. So his mother was lost, stolen, or strayed, and no one knew which. She was gone. She might have been kidnapped. She might have just wandered off into the unknown. But Mrs. Dupree, in her golden gown, would henceforth be known, not for the soothing lullabies which she sang to her son, not for the cinnamon toast and cocoa which she served in the nursery, not for the smart dinner parties which she put on, but only for being lost. What kind of a heritage is that? And yet that's the oblivion into which we cast most of the people we know. An old African proverb says that when an old person dies, it is as if a library had burned down. Think of all the experiences, opinions, episodes, stories, triumphs, frustrations stored away in our minds. We could access that material at a moment's notice. But one day, all that material will be lost. No one will be able to draw on it, least of all ourselves. And we don't have to be very old to have a story worth telling. Our minds, even the young people, are filled with very valuable, interesting things to say. Surely we should try to distill and record our adventures. Our own stories are the best ones we will ever have to tell. This is valuable material, the stuff of real life. And as we tell our own stories, we should tell the stories of others that we know and love, preserving their stories through our own eyes. So I'm going to talk about written documents tonight, and I'm going to set out some rules for the procedures that I think are important and illustrate them with excerpts from two sources, from the published works of Howard R. Driggs and from quotations of the Claremont Oral History Program, which Richard mentioned a little while ago, an ongoing program that began about 3 years ago that records what LDS women have to say about their lives. These will be brief excerpts quoted anonymously. We use all these anonymously so far. And I use these rules for all my projects. After years of mucking around in different people's lives, they're what I use, and I think they're as good as anybody else's rules. And I want to make 5 points. The first is to tell the story you have, which I've already said. It is the best story you have. Take control of it. The person who keeps the record owns the story. Sometimes I write something up and send it out to my sisters. They come back and say, it wasn't like that at all. That's not how it was. But do they write it down? No. So I can either change it or not. It's my story. I wrote it. I'm in charge. I own it. Now, we cannot avoid filling our records with our prejudices and our preferences, our opinions. That's what our minds are full of, and all unaware, those are the things that we write. But no one else can tell our story better than we can. Everything we write is what happened, or which we would have liked to have happen, which happens, which people write more and more as they get farther and farther from the experience. They tell it the way they wish it was, rather than the way it actually happened. All these things filtered through our minds. We write what we perceive. Every writer writes with preconceived ideas, limited knowledge, and with deep immersion into his own culture. We just cannot escape that. We have to go with what we have always, knowing that we have a limited view. Yet what we write can illuminate our worlds for others in the future. We have to get those stories down. If we want to live forever in the minds and annals of the earth, we have to write. Each time we sit down to write, we make 1,000 conscious and unconscious decisions that reveal our affections and our prejudices. Even as we review the lives and actions of others, what we write and say is the perception of our minds, not the truth. Yet with all the faults of our efforts to record our lives and the lives around us as accurately as possible, the process of writing and the product we turn out may well be the most valuable thing that we ever do in our lives. Driggs tells his own story in Cow Kid. This is his boy's life. He's already a town kid in Pleasant Grove, yet he particularly values, and I'm using quotations here, the stirring experiences that came with new scenes and meeting friendly folk as we followed old trails and worked with ranchers of the West. For him then it was a joy to be alive, to see beauty in mountains, valleys, and wildlife. He doesn't talk about his time in the town doing chores on the family place. He celebrates his Cow Kid days, when unforgettable lessons of life came with dramatic impressiveness to an eager boy during those crowded months. He had wanted to be a real cowboy, but he was too late for that. How was he to learn? And he reports being stirred by books, by reading an account by James Ballinger of cowboys driving a herd, following the trail from Texas to Kansas. From the beginning, then, his dreams of Western adventure are intertwined with published books. His stories are somewhat conventional and formulaic in that there are good cowboys and villains, heroes and roughnecks. He admits in his letters to friends at home that he tried to create stirring adventures, and as he said, then he began to feel the joy of authorship. He experienced things, he turned them into adventures, and he wrote them down. He learned real skills on a roundup with his uncle. He could hold a herd and cut out ranch steers. He passes a big test in staying with the herd during a difficult stretch. His uncle said that he did it like a hero. And the ultimate compliment, you're no cow kid, but a real cowboy. His days on the trail and ranch were not forgotten and never could be. Creeks also tells the story of Benjamin Driggs, his father, and Ben, the wagon boy. Ben, born in 1837, moved to Nauvoo with his family as a young boy. He saw wagons being built in a shop across the road from where he lived and coveted a wagon of his own. His father built and gave him one for his 7th birthday. Young Ben proudly pulled his wagon all over Nauvoo. Men working on the Nauvoo temple saw that that wagon would be pretty useful for them in pulling around their tools, and they asked for it. Ben, heartbroken, made the great sacrifice and gave it to them, a brave act that came to define his life. Driggs uses Ben to tell the Mormon story as he and his family joined in the trek west. The book is also Ben's coming-of-age story. He comes to know the Indians and their ways in his frontier adventures. But the power of this little story and the fact that Driggs recorded it can be seen in an email letter I received from Driggs' great-nephew, Alan C. Christensen, who is here tonight. As he said, I wept when I read in 1943 how Ben gave his little wagon to the building of the Nauvoo temple. It was a sacrifice I could not comprehend. It was not until years later that I came to realize that neither the wagon nor much of the boyhood would have been remembered had it not been for the sacrifice of the wagon to a greater cause. And he goes on to say, Howard R. Driggs wanted to make certain that hidden heroes of the American West were not forgotten. He wanted proven role models for children. In another of these small adventure books about the West for children, Driggs borrowed the story of George Harrison, a neighbor in American Fork, Utah, to write George the Handcart Boy. In that boy, he told the Mormon story of conversion and immigration from Great Britain in the 1850s and the long walk across the American plains, pulling a handcart. George is thrilled to be going to America, glad that his father is through slaving in that smoky old factory. As is well known, 2 of these late handcart companies ran into bad weather in Wyoming, and many people died, starved, sick, and frozen before a heroic rescue of the survivors. But this book says nothing of the poverty of the immigrants and very little about the suffering of the handcart pioneers, themes that are usually stressed with these stories. George also lived with Indians and worked for the Army at Forts Laramie and Bridger. He came west with the Army and worked at Camp Floyd. George has very good relationships in the Army. There's no indication that the soldiers are marching west to invade the territory of Utah. He has a different, slighted view on these stories. What is important here is adventure. And this little story has legs too. As Janet told me, 2 of George's grandsons are planning a documentary video about his life. A facsimile reprint of the book will be out this summer. I hope that all these little books are republished. They make a charming, finished introduction to Driggs' heroic young men and good reading for today's children. I certainly enjoyed reading them myself. My own favorite of the Driggs' books is Wild Roses, a romantic adventure, a formulaic Western that has much riding and ranching and even some romancing. Griggs seems to be Fred Benton, the narrator, maybe 18, still in high school, who becomes a good friend of the spirited, attractive heroine Alta. Fred, as befits a hero, has, and this is a description of him, a spontaneous, open-hearted attitude about life. He was full of latent manliness, clearly shown in his straight, square-shouldered form, firm step, and intelligent eyes. Yet he possessed a dash of boyishness, too, that kept him natural and unsophisticated. Alison Morgan, a dashing girl, a picture of animation, is graceful, alert, eager for fun, her pretty cheeks glowing and her eyes laughing. Fred thinks Alta must be the daughter of some rancher, but she gave signs of a greater culture and a wider experience than the ranch life of those days afforded. Perhaps she was some city visitor to the valley. But that was unlikely because no untrained city girl could have ridden a horse race with such skill. Who was she? Ah, a mystery woman. This charming Alta was full of life and fun. She liked friends and she won them quickly by her artless grace and genuine goodness. But though she seemed carefree and merry, her conscience was keen and true. I mean, how about that? The story proceeds in predictable fashion. Alta is kidnapped by the bad cowboy, Bud Nixon. Uncle Dave, the old trapper, finds her and whispers to her through the wall that they will save her. But bad Bud Nixon hears this and shoots Uncle Dave. In comes Flying Arrow, the good Indian. He sees Nixon shoot Uncle Dave and comes at Bud with this great line. You kill my friend, Longbeard. You wrong, Laughing Eyes. That's Alta. You die, and thrusts his knife deep into the black heart of Bud Nixon. That's the familiar, intoxicating, delightful romance of the Old West. Who can help but love it? Not me. So tell your own story. It's the best story you have, and besides, it will be a better story for your attention to it. Here's an example of a person telling her own story from the Claremont Oral History Program. It's valuable to her because it has been a strong, sure anchor in her life. It's valuable to me because it shows just 2 degrees of separation from 1840 or so. And she writes, the most important experience in my early religious life was with my great-grandmother. When I was about 6 years old, we went to a family reunion. There was a very old lady there. She said, I want to talk to her, and she pointed to me. So they helped her up out of her chair, and she took my hand, and we went out into Grandpa's fruit orchard. We sat under a peach tree, and she said that she was my great-grandmother. She came to Nauvoo when she was a very young child. Joseph Smith walked all the streets of the town, knew everybody, and talked and visited with them. One day, he was sitting at the table in her house, talking to her father. As I came by, Joseph Smith pulled me up on his knee and said, "Oh, little one." They stopped talking, and he looked directly into my eyes, just looked at me, and I felt this blast of something going through me, and it kind of shook me. Then he patted me on the head and put me down, and I ran off. That night I told my father how I felt, but I was still a little shook up about it. And he said, "Well, my dear, you're very lucky. Now you have your own personal conviction that he is a special man and he is the prophet of the Lord. And so you can follow him because you've been given this special conviction." She said that all her life, Joseph Smith had been a marvelous prophet to her because he spoke to her and influenced her. She was then 98 years of age, bearing this testimony to me as a 6-year-old. She said she had promised the Lord that she would tell all of her 11 children and spouses, and their children and their spouses, and their children and grandchildren, and now she was down to her great-grandchildren. She wanted to be sure that she knew the prophet. So all of my life, Since I was 6 years old, I've never had any problem believing that Joseph Smith is a prophet and a wonderful special man because of my great-grandmother's testimony. That personal witness has stayed with me my whole life and is what has gotten me through all the challenges in my life. Tell your story, even if it's not always the most uplifting and thrilling that you can imagine. Here's another one from the Claremont collection. My mom pretty much kicked me out when I was 14 because I was such a mess. We got into a big old fight. She escalated on purpose to get it physical and called the police on me. And they kicked me out to go live with my stepdad for a month until my dad took me in. When I moved in with my dad, I went to another high school. There was another sexual abuse. When I was in high school, because I was promiscuous and stupid and naive, I'd find myself in situations that were not appropriate. I never finished high school. I did adult school a couple of times. I lived with my real dad a couple of times. I was a runaway for a year, all in the 4 years I should have been in high school. Write your own story, even if it is not ideal. When Fred Benton in Wild Roses yearns for the good old days when the country was thick with game, trapper Uncle Dave sets him straight. He says that the best time for Fred was right then. Don't go to sighing for any better time. The life you're living is the best you'll ever live. When you write, write to be read. Do not just ventilate. Think of speaking to your characters in person and observe the courtesies that you would speaking face to face. Write for an audience. Write for your grandchildren. Writing for them helps us think of including things that change and might otherwise be left out. If you remember it and it is important to you, write it down. If you do not remember it, if you do not write it down, you will forget it. Rule number 2, stay real. Do not romanticize your characters. Tell the good and tell the bad. Do not clean it up. Do not sugarcoat. Do not revere. Here are stories of 3 successful marriages from the Claremont Project. Here we see some interesting reality. My husband and I have had a very good marriage of almost 47 years. Not perfect, but very, very good. I'm sure there were days when he would rather have been elsewhere. There were days I thought I would rather be elsewhere. But most important, our marriage, our relationship, our commitment to one another and our family have stood the test of time. We've worked out our problems together. We've learned to live with each other's shortcomings and idiosyncrasies, sometimes ignoring them, most times accepting them, always trying to better understand them. The reward for our efforts is the special relationship we have today. I am grateful for the good man he is, for the way he has provided for our family, for the devoted father he is to our children, and for the faithful husband he has been to me. I am blessed to have him as my companion. Here's another. I was coming from Salt Lake to visit in Los Angeles, staying with relatives in the country. A girlfriend wanted me to meet a friend of hers in L.A. He was 31 or 2 then, tired of dating. He said he would meet me if I could get into Salt Lake. He was not coming out to the country to get me. He did not impress me. I thought he was just boring. He took me to the beach, but wouldn't go wading. Then he took me to church. Then he took me to the train. A month later, he invited me to come down and go to a concert in the Hollywood Bowl. I was excited to see the concert, but not to see him again, so I came down and stayed at his house. Oh, his mother. I thought he would have a quiet, dowdy mother, but she was really attractive, fun, vivacious, a well-groomed woman. His dad was very successful and impressive. They were just delightful, wonderful people. I was so impressed with his parents. He came up to Utah to visit me several times. I gradually realized what a jewel he was. 6 months later, we were married. Okay, here's another one. I married a young man who was a missionary. His 2 companions were an older couple. He would go out with the one that felt the best that day. They kind of liked me. So when the missionary was ready to go home, my girlfriend and I were with the older couple and this elder. He dropped the couple off first, and then he dropped my friend off, and I thought, well, this is highly irregular, because we were not to be within arm's length of missionaries. My father was bishop at that time, and those were pretty strict rules. When they came to our house for dinner, we did not fraternize, we behaved ourselves. And so this elder pulled over to the side of the road, and he said that the older couple had told him what a lovely young lady I was. And then he asked me to marry him. And I said, yes, elder. And I thought, you idiot, you don't even know what his name is. And that evening, he went home with me and told my parents he had asked me to marry him and that I had said yes. My dad said, elder, it's past 10 o'clock, it's time you should be in bed. And that was it. The next day he left to go home from his mission, didn't come back for 3 months. My mother said, did you really say that? And I said, yes. And she said, are you really going to marry him? I said, I guess. He's all right, isn't he? It did turn out to be a successful marriage. Okay, rule number 3, include some history. Here's a story that illuminates just a little piece of LDS history. When I was Stake Relief Society president and held a Relief Society stake meeting, I knew I was going to go to an area leadership meeting the next day. So I asked the RS presidents what they would like to have discussed at the area meeting, and one said, well, we get instructions in our meetings for our families, and then we go home and tell our husbands. They haven't heard those instructions. They don't want to do those new things. We're getting different signals. I brought up that valid comment at the area meeting. We had a visitor at our meeting, a regional rep or general authority or something. The visitor unexpectedly asked me how the problem could be solved. Off the top of my head, I said, well, maybe the Relief Society and the priesthood should meet together. He said, okay, you go ahead and do that every 5th Sunday, and I'll take the responsibility for it. I know that this is done everywhere now, but I don't know if it came from us. We may have made policy. All policy is made somewhere. If you know of some, get it down. That's very interesting. Rule number 4, develop your own voice and use it. And I just love the diction in this little piece from the oral histories, which talks about Adam and Eve. And it talks quite a bit about the different views of original sin that she and her Catholic sister-in-law discuss. And this is what she says. I have always lovingly said that it was Eve who got the ball rolling, that Adam would still be throwing bones to the dinosaurs and having them retrieved. But Eve comes on and says that they were going for the fruit. I saw her as the instigator and the actual power behind our dear, lovable, helpless Adam. You don't think that's funny? I do. Rule 5, sum up from time to time. Here's Nick Wilson on the Indians. And, Nick Wilson knows. He says, I know that the Indians were a treacherous and revengeful people. They were always determined a life to pay for a life. They demanded a life to pay for a life, and they would often do bloodthirsty things. But the whites were mostly to blame. If they had treated the Indians kindly instead of taking mean advantage of them, the Indians would have been kind and friendly. I cannot blame the Indians as much as some do. They were good friends to me, and most of them have peaceful hearts. Great, a little nuance about the Indians. And here's Howard Driggs on the Mountain Men from the Old West Speaks. Now at a distance of over 100 years, it's hard for us to see the Mountain Men as they really were. We think of them as dauntless and intrepid explorers, and indeed they were. But they were after wealth first, and the thought that they were making history came to them second, if at all. They were men of action, motivated by the need for survival. Romantics and sentimentalists have glorified and ennobled them, as they have the savages against whom the mountain men strove. But for us truly to understand them, we should remember that it was competition rather than idealism that drove them on. My message to you is to sit down and write about your own life. Start now where you are now. Write on the computer so that you can search, print out, edit, and save. Put your precious writings where they can be found. Keep your eye on the main chance. Try to get in the writing habit. The more you write, the more you will have to write. Your memory will open. You will have things to say. You will never regret the time and energy that you spend telling your story and the stories of others. My conclusion this evening is from Howard Driggs again, who quotes the Injuns as saying, "White man's book never forgets." Isn't that a wonderful idea? White man's book never forgets. May we all leave books that will remember and talk. Thank you very much. I believe we're supposed to move over here and take questions.
As the Bushmans are getting situated, I fail to recognize two people that are here tonight. I know all of you are VIPs, but these are really, really important VIPs. One is my predecessor, Jerry Sherritt, and for whom the library is named. Jerry, it's always good to have you on campus. And also a good friend from down south and the former president of Dixie College, Doug Alder. Where are you, Doug? Right there. Good to have you here, Doug. Just 2 days ago in my office arrived a package from Camille, and it was a commemorative booklet on the anniversary of the Pony Express Trail. And if I remember correctly, Camille, this was Howard Driggs' son that came up with this logo. Is that correct? So this was Perry Driggs, who of course has an inextricable tie to this campus. But he came up with this little emblem, if you will, or logo for the Pony Express Trail, and yet another memento, Claudia, of history. You've helped bring it to life tonight how important it is for us to write our own histories. And I hope, again, for the students that are here, you take that to heart. You know, we talk about a journal, and you think about it in the starkness that Claudia described it, that once you're gone, it's not there anymore. And I for one, will come away tonight with increased motivation. I hope to write some things in my own life. We're delighted to have these two willing to take some questions. You can ask them really hard ones, too. Richard will moderate, but have at it. Thank you very much to both of you for your willingness to do so.
Questions?
Yes. Is a copy of your talk available? I'm sorry. Oh, things are flying all around here. Is it possible to get a copy of your comments tonight?
Yes, I'd be glad to send you a copy. Give me your email address and I'll send it to you online.
All right. Thank you very much.
The last part of that book was the title, Wild Roses.
Say that, what I heard.
You gave a quote and talked a little bit about a book entitled Wild Roses something, and I didn't get it all written down. Wild Roses.
Wild Roses is the title.
By
It's one
whom?
of Howard Driggs' books. I hope you'll read it. I really thought it was lots of fun.
Talk about how two scholars kept things moving with family life and those values as well as your professional lives. How did you make those trade-offs work? I mean, you're still together, so you obviously got it worked through, but give us some tips.
Why don't you answer that, Richard? What do you have to say?
I don't have an answer. Well, I mean, it's great good fortune that we should both end up in the same business because we could work together, and that rarely happens in marriages. The great part of it was that we were willing to read each other's writing. We didn't write things together formally, but we would read everything that everyone wrote. Claudia, who is a natural good writer, was very patient with me, whose writing she could not stand, and she was always reading against the grain, picked up all sorts of bad habits. So it became very helpful, and I came to count on her for improving not just the prose, but the argumentation. If things didn't work, somehow or other she picked it up. So that was very pleasant.
Well, it has been very useful for us to work together, but when we did start in the beginning, he doesn't like my ideas. He doesn't know what I have to say. I mean, he tells me what I think, and I don't like his style, so I tell him how to write it. So that's our trade-off. But as for fitting things in, you know, scholarly life, especially academic teaching and writing, is the kind of thing you do in your extra 15 minutes, is here and there. It isn't as if you have to be one place from 7:30 in the morning till 6 at night. You have quite a bit of freedom to plan your own life, and as long as you're flexible and willing to do things that drop everything you're doing for the thing that needs to be done at the moment, I think you can get a lot done. I think can be done.
Would you both tell us what your writing has done and your ability to think and to crystallize issues?
That's a good question.
Well, as I told one of the classes this morning, I don't think you have any idea what you think until you have to write it down. Writing down does make you take a stand, makes you crystallize your senses. So I'm always saying that when people are working on papers, working on big projects, they should write every day, even from the beginning of their research, because little things will occur to them that will be useful later on. And if they don't get those down, they will forget them. And as I told this class, when somebody tells me something like, I've done all the research for the book, now I just have to write it, my heart falls, because I know they still haven't thought through any of the stuff, and now it's old hat, and they're not going to write an exciting piece. So writing is the key to crystallizing your ideas.
John and I were talking a little bit today about writing short stories. We'd both taken a course on short story writing. During that time when I was writing, trying to write a short story, I began to see the whole world in terms of stories, because I was looking for little plots that might work themselves out. You are a writer, you begin to think of the world in terms of ideas. You're always trying to figure out what's happening, how formulated in your mind. It's like people who speak all the time. The general authorities get all those stories that they tell in their many, many talks because they need material. They're always wanting to find something that will illustrate a point. So it becomes a habit of mind. And after a while, you get to the point where you begin to trust your mind. You realize that if you begin to get an idea and you write it down, then it's like pulling a thread out of a ball of yarn. It just keeps coming. And you find that you have capacities to sort of make ideas emerge that you didn't have before, when it all just sort of laid latent. You never called upon your mind to think. And if you write, you're demanding things of your mind that you don't ordinarily do, and it gets stronger and better as a result.
Richard has this great image that he uses, that you read some things, get the material in your mind, and then you just sort of lay it out mentally in front of you and lay your mind on it as if you would lay your hand on it. And then for him, because he has a lot of experience in doing this, then the ideas just begin to flow like this thread coming out. And he has lots of original ideas. And he has taught me that we can all have original ideas. We think if we're writing a paper, we have to just do some research, find out what other people have said, and then talk about those things. But what do those things tell us? What will we have if we put that material through our minds? We are capable of new ideas on any subject. I think that's really a very thrilling conception when you can use.
One of the most misleading words in common usage is the word smart. We think you have to be smart or else you don't get ideas. That is not true. The human mind, every human mind, is capable of miracles if we just sort of learn to trust it and use it. And I think anyone here, I've talked to all sorts of people today where I've been aware of this, they are in situations where they learn to use their mind, and the mind will perform miracles for you without, just by letting it do its work for you.
They say that in order to become a better writer, you've got to read good writers. So do you, two of you have some favorite authors, and why?
Actually, that's a question I asked at dinner last night. I said to everybody, what was your favorite book? And it was hard business to get favorite books out of people's minds. And then they asked me who my favorite historical characters were, and I couldn't come up with them either. But authors I can come up with, and I think you cannot beat the English 19th century novelists. I think everyone should reread all of Jane Austen every year. I do it. I love those books. Jane Austen, I think it is impossible to beat War and Peace as a novel, Tolstoy's great story. My very favorite novel is Willa Cather's Shadows on the Rock, about colonial Quebec, which I just adore. Those are some of my favorites. What are yours?
Well, there's some terrific writers, and you just stumble on them, and you like sort of the sound of their prose. And when I was writing about Joseph Smith, I had a couple of these books on the shelf in front of me. And maybe books you've never heard of, but there's a fellow named Robert Chernow who's written most recently, I don't know what his most recent book is, but the one before the most recent one was a book by about Alexander Hamilton. Then he'd written a previous book called Titan, which is about John D. Rockefeller. And he has this fabulous storytelling capacity. David McCullough, of course, many of you know, has that capacity to tell wonderful stories. There's a biography of Samuel Johnson, the 18th century writer. And it's both the matter of getting the words, sort of the rhythm and the words and the compaction of the sentences, but it's also about the chances you take in sort of evoking the humanness of a situation. Inexperienced writers are afraid to take chances. They just stick right to their material, and it gets kind of mechanical. But after you get a little more confident, you're willing to sort of let your heart move in to the situation, and you begin to sort of know how much you can go in sort of evoking what it must have been like at that moment. These men do that magnificently, and I learned some of the risks you can take in heading in that direction from Chernow and McCullough.
Simon Schama, too, don't you think?
Yeah, he's a little bit of a fancy pants for my taste, but
Terrific stylist.
ornate and overdone.
I'd like to go back to something you just said about you don't have to be smart. Pick up on that. I'd like to remind you of two poems that I'm sure both of you know very well, both of them by Wordsworth. The first one is that wonderful sonnet about the world is too much with us. And you might recall he says, it's, you know, our society has lost a lot. And in the sestet of that sonnet, he says, I'd rather be a pagan, suckled in a creed outworn. So might I, standing on this pleasant lay, have glimpses that would make me less forlorn. See Proteus rising from the sea, or hear old Triton blow his wreathed horn. And in his ode, there's another spot at the end of one of the strophes there where he says, the youth who daily further from the east must travel still as nature's priest, and by the vision splendid is on his way attended. At length the man perceives it die away and fade into the light of common day. That is one of the really great tragedies that we live through in a post-Enlightenment world. Do you have any advice how to keep that from happening? How do we keep things from fading into the light of common day? How do we keep that vision of Proteus rising from the sea and Triton blowing his wreathed horn? How do you keep that fresh and alive? All good authors have that. What do you do to protect it? You write it down.
You write it down again. You just keep writing it till you get it right. And that's how you do it. I think that's, I don't know, I shouldn't do this thing. I have to show you what a terrible, unserious person I really have been in my life. And this is the kind of person I was before Richard turned me into another one. So I'm going to quote a paraphrase of "The World is Too Much With Us," which a friend of ours at Harvard wrote before exam period. "The world was too much with us, late and soon. Dating, not grinding, we laid waste our powers. Little we have of knowledge that is ours. We have wasted our time like great buffoons. These notes, which while we romanced neath the moon, the grinds poured o'er until the early hours, these books which lay closed up like sleeping flowers, for this, for everything, we are out of tune. Alas, we know them not. Great God, I wish that I had taken courses later in the day, so might I have attended 2 or 3 or 4. So might I be feeling less forlorn, not think of casting self into the sea, or hear professors laughing me to scorn." That's the kind of thing I like. I'm sorry.
Claudia does have a library of lyrics like that in her head. Every situation she has a song lyric for. It's amazing.
That's my real self.
Yes.
Hold on a minute. We need to get you on recorded. That's why we're going with these mics. Is so, yeah. Raise your. Here you go. Right here. Oh no, you're not the mic person. Here comes the mic person. Hold on a sec. There we go.
I was most impressed to learn that you, 250th anniversary of Columbia.
What about it?
I would really be interested to know what you did there. That would be
Well,
a remarkable
actually,
occasion.
I didn't do all that much. I mean, I thought it was a disappointing anniversary. I had been celebrating all kinds of things in Delaware. I did manage to get a few of my things through. One of the things on which we spent endless amounts of trouble was trying to locate all the rooms and places where important scholars from the university had held their classes so we could put plaques up. Well, then people began to feel left out, and so pretty soon we had a list of over 400 plaques that needed to go up. So then we had to quit that idea. So I did get this idea, I think. I said we need a huge cake. We need a cake in the shape of Low Library. That we did have, but it was a big mess, so that wasn't too successful either. But they raised a lot of money, and Columbia is not a good place for alumni activity, so everything we did was a plus. They did more things than they used to do. We published a shelf full of books of all kinds of things, and that was one of our big successes, I thought. And we had a special seminar that people could go to study the history of Columbia and so on. But if I did it again, I'd do a better job.
500's coming up soon, I think.
Yes, I had a question here to clarify for myself, if you would. The use of passive voice when you're writing in a more technical, formal form, and you want to avoid you doing so. You want to avoid using passive voice. How would you have an idea on that?
Just turn all your verbs active. Just don't use passive forms of the verbs. It's all in the verbs.
That's
but,
right.
Yeah. Right.
If you go through any piece of writing, you'll be amazed how many times you use the verb to be, was, is, and that if you think about it, you can turn it into an active verb. And the point is that you want every part of the sentence to carry information. If you use the passive verb, you have the most important part of the sentence not carrying information other than it is. So you always want to add that in. Plus the verb has that punch. That's where the action is. It's strictly a matter of habit. if you work at it and just insist that you rearrange your sentences that way, it'll be much better. You referred to a certain kind of writing. There's a certain kind of objective writing where you try to obscure who is doing what, because you just want to talk about it as if this were the reality out there, free from any kind of human intervention. That, I think, is deceptive writing. I think that's always bad writing, and in the long run is not good for the human mind. So I think your comment is well taken. We all should go to active verbs. Claudia thinks naturally in active verbs, so it's easier for her.
We have time for one last question, and there's been a persistent hand in the back, so we don't have a microphone, so please just stand up and belt it out if you would, please.
Hi. Well, that must have been my sister Polly. She's the big quilter. That right? Lives in Fresno. Well, I don't know. I think a lot of it was that we were all girls. You know, we were girls together. My father was very busy with church activities and with business. He was gone most of the time. But my mother was a remarkable person, and I'm sure you heard a lot about her. She just had... well, as I mentioned in this talk, she just had incredible gifts, just incredible gifts. The things that she grew up under, nothing special circumstances, but there were things that she could do nobody else could do. And I'm a project person because I'm her daughter. And we all have this impious, that is, unpious style. So we all are very irreverent the way we talk, and that's part of it, too. We have lots of inside jokes. But it was a very good family to grow up in. My sisters, you know, a while ago, I had my DNA taken, and it represented that I had, I won't give you, I had 10% sub-Saharan African. And so this brought up all kinds of questions in my family, but they refused to have their DNA done. They insist it's a mistake. And I say, no, it's no mistake. We're all exactly alike. Everything I've got, you've got. Anyway, we had a good time growing up. So thanks for that tribute to my sisters.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've all been richly blessed by being here tonight. I want to tell Richard that was as moving and sincere introduction as I've ever heard. And someday I hope my wife can say some nice things about me. That was, oh, there we go, the other way, yeah. Thank you very much. I'll say those things about her. That's even better. But that was really, I thought, very touching. I hope tonight, as you leave, you'll have a chance to consider contributing to the Howard R. Driggs Memorial Endowment. There's a little envelope inside your program. I hope tonight you've seen firsthand what this lecture series is all about. Next year we'll represent the fifth Driggs lecture, and we anticipate it's got a long way to go to top tonight. So Claudia, our sincere thanks again for your being here. I want to thank you all for being here again, and as a memento to the Bushmans, this is a 1943 copy of Western America, and Janet tells me it's in the original brown paper that came in from the publisher, and we hope that that will be a warm reminder of your time on campus. We're richly blessed by your being here, and again, thank you so much, and join me in thanking the Bushmans for being here tonight.